The stepmother forced her stepdaughter to get engaged to a homeless man to humiliate her. But on the wedding day, he revealed something that surprised everyone. The sun was setting over the luxurious Mason estate, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. However, the beauty of the sunset contrasted with the storm raging inside the property. Lucy Mason, a beautiful 25-year-old free spirit, was on her knees on the floor of her bedroom, tears streaming down her cheeks as she begged her stepmother, Vivian. "Please, Vivian, you can't force me to do this. It's madness," Lucy cried, her voice breaking with desperation. Vivian, an elegant 45-year-old woman with a chilling coldness, looked at her stepdaughter with disdain. Her steel-colored eyes showed not an ounce of compassion. "Oh, dear Lucy," she said in a honeyed voice that hid her true nature. "Don't be so dramatic. It's for your own good. Do you think I'll allow you to waste your life with those silly dreams of being an artist? You need stability, and this marriage will give it to you." Lucy stood up, facing Vivian with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Stability? By marrying a homeless man I don't even know? Have you gone mad?" Vivian smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Charles may not have money or social standing, but that's exactly what you need. Someone who depends completely on you and on me. He'll be easy to control, and you'll learn to be a good submissive wife." "My father would never allow this," Lucy exclaimed, clinging to her last hope. Vivian's smile widened, becoming almost predatory. "Oh, darling, your father agrees. After all, who do you think suggested this solution?" Lucy's world crumbled. Her father, Edward Mason, had always been her pillar, her protector. She couldn't believe he would agree to this crazy plan. At that moment, Edward entered the room. He was a 50-year-old man with graying hair and a worried expression on his face. "Lucy, my dear," he began, his voice tired. "I know this seems crazy, but Vivian is right. You need to settle down. This young man, Charles, needs an opportunity, and we can give it to him. Besides, who knows, maybe in time you'll come to love him." Lucy looked at her father, feeling as if a chasm was opening between them. "Dad, please, don't do this to me. You know I have plans, dreams. I want to study art in New York. I want—" "Enough nonsense," Vivian interrupted. "The wedding will be in a week. Charles has already accepted. End of discussion." With those words, Vivian left the room, followed by Edward, who cast one last apologetic look at his daughter before closing the door. Lucy collapsed on the bed, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. How had it come to this? Just a few months ago, her life was perfect. She was about to fulfill her dream of studying at the New York Academy of Art. She had a boyfriend she loved, Alex, a promising young man who shared her passion for art. But everything changed when her father married Vivian. At first, the woman seemed charming, always smiling and attentive. Gradually, however, Lucy began to notice changes. Her father became more distant, more prone to giving in to Vivian's whims. And now this, a forced marriage to a stranger. As tears ran down her face, Lucy made a decision. She wouldn't give up without a fight. Somehow she would find a way to escape this fate they wanted to impose on her. On the other side of the city, in a homeless shelter, Charles Mendoza received the news of his upcoming marriage with mixed emotions. At 30 years old, life had hit him hard. Just a year ago, he had a stable job as an accountant in a major company, but a series of bad decisions and unfortunate circumstances had left him on the street. "Are you sure about this, Charles?" asked Mary, the social worker who had been helping him. "Marrying a stranger, it doesn't seem like the best solution." Charles sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Despite his situation, he maintained a clean and dignified appearance. "What other choice do I have, Mary? It's an opportunity to get off the streets, to start over. Maybe I can even help others once I'm back on my feet." Mary looked at him with concern. "But what about love? Compatibility?" Charles gave a sad smile. "Love is a luxury I can't afford right now. Who knows, maybe in time." As Charles prepared to sleep in his shelter bed, he couldn't help but think about the strange turn his life had taken. Who was this Lucy Mason? What would his life be like from now on? What Charles didn't know, what no one knew, was that this arranged marriage was going to trigger a series of events that would shake the foundations of the Mason family and reveal long-buried secrets. As night fell over the city, Two souls prepared unknowingly for a destiny that would change their lives forever. Lucy, determined to escape. Charles, clinging to one last hope. And in the shadows, Vivian, weaving a web of deception that would soon begin to unravel. The countdown to the wedding had begun, and with it, the beginning of a story of love, betrayal, and redemption that no one could have anticipated. The days flew by, and before Lucy could fully assimilate the situation, she found herself in front of the mirror in her room, wearing an elegant wedding dress. Her reflection showed a look of sadness and resignation. Despite her attempts to avoid this marriage, including a failed escape with her boyfriend Alex, Vivian had managed to thwart all her plans. "You look beautiful, dear," said Vivian, entering the room with a triumphant smile. Charles won't know what hit him. Lucy turned to face her stepmother, her eyes burning with a mixture of anger and determination. "You may force me to marry, Vivian, but you can never control my heart." Vivian let out a cold laugh. "Oh, Lucy, how naive you are. The heart is the least of it. What matters is control, and soon you'll learn that valuable lesson." Meanwhile, in a room on the other side of the mansion, Charles was nervously adjusting his tie in front of a mirror. He had never felt so out of place as in that borrowed wedding suit that was slightly too big for him. "Are you ready?" asked Edward Mason, entering the room. Lucy's father observed Charles with a mixture of curiosity and what could be interpreted as guilt. Charles nodded, unable to find the right words. How could he be ready to marry a woman he didn't know, in a house that made him feel like an intruder? "I know this isn't conventional," Edward continued, avoiding eye contact, "but I trust you'll know how to take care of my daughter. She is special." Before Charles could respond, the door burst open and Vivian entered, radiant in a dress that seemed designed to outshine the bride. "It's time," she announced enthusiastically. "All the guests are waiting. Charles, dear, remember our agreement. Behave and you'll have everything you've ever dreamed of." Charles felt a shiver run down his spine at Vivian's words. There was something about the way she looked at him that made him feel like a piece in a game whose rules he didn't know. The ceremony began in the mansion's garden. Guests from high society murmured among themselves, curious about this sudden and peculiar marriage. Lucy walked towards the altar with mechanical steps, her face a mask of indifference that hid the turmoil within. When she finally stood in front of Charles, their gazes met for the first time. Lucy was surprised not to see the roughness or desperation she expected from a homeless man. Instead, she found warm eyes and a nervous smile that for a moment made her doubt. The priest began the ceremony, his voice resonating in the garden. "We are gathered here today to unite in holy matrimony Lucy Mason and Charles Mendoza." As the ceremony progressed, Lucy couldn't help but think about Alex. Where would he be now? Had he managed to escape from the thugs Vivian had sent after him? Her heart shrank as she remembered their last conversation. "Lucy, my love, I can't let you do this," Alex had said, his eyes full of desperation. "Let's run away together, start a new life far from here." But Vivian had discovered them. With calculated coldness, she had threatened not only Alex's artistic career, but also his family. "An accident can happen to anyone," she had said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Alex had no choice but to disappear, leaving Lucy heartbroken and without options. The priest continued, "If anyone knows of any reason why this couple should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." A tense silence fell over the audience. Lucy held her breath, a part of her hoping against all hope that someone, maybe Alex, would appear to stop this farce. But no one spoke. Then, by the power vested in me— "Wait!" Charles's voice resonated strongly, startling all those present. Lucy looked at him, surprised and confused. Charles took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the guests until they stopped on Vivian, who looked at him with a mixture of surprise and barely contained fury. "Before this continues, there's something I must say," Charles began, his voice gaining strength with each word. "I can't go on with this farce without revealing the truth." Vivian took a step forward, her smile tense. "Charles, dear, this is not the time to—" But Charles interrupted her. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mason, but it's exactly the time. Lucy," he said, turning to the bride, "there's something you need to know about me and your stepmother." A murmur ran through the guests. Edward Mason approached, his face a mask of concern. "What's going on here?" Charles took Lucy's hands, surprising her with the gentleness of his touch. "Lucy, I'm not who Vivian has made you believe. Yes, I've been living on the streets, but that's only part of the story. The truth is that Before he could finish, Vivian lunged forward, trying to stop him. "Enough! This wedding will take place right now or—" But it was too late. Charles turned to the audience, his voice clear and firm. "My name is Charles Mendoza, and I was the personal assistant of Vivian Mason's first husband." The collective gasp that followed this revelation was deafening. Lucy looked at Charles, then at Vivian, whose face had lost all color. "What are you saying?" Lucy asked, her voice barely a whisper. Charles looked her directly in the eyes. "I'm saying that your stepmother has a dark past, one that involves manipulation, deception, and the death of her first husband. And I believe she's planning to do the same with your father." Chaos broke out in the garden. Guests began to murmur and move restlessly. Edward Mason stood paralyzed, looking at his wife with a mixture of disbelief and growing horror. Vivian, regaining her composure, let out a forced laugh. "How ridiculous. This man is obviously disturbed. Guards, get him out of here." But before anyone could move, Charles pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I have evidence, documents, recordings, everything you need to see the truth behind Vivian Mason's facade." Lucy, feeling the world spinning around her, clung to Charles's arm to maintain her balance. "Why? Why did you agree to this marriage if you knew all this?" Charles looked at her, a mixture of determination and regret in his eyes. "Because it was the only way to get close enough to expose the truth. I'm sorry, Lucy. I never wanted to involve you in this, but I had no other choice." As the commotion spread among the guests and Vivian struggled to maintain control of the situation, Lucy found herself in the eye of the hurricane, her world changing irrevocably in a matter of minutes. The wedding that was supposed to seal her fate had become the stage for a revelation that threatened to destroy everything she thought she knew about her family. And in the midst of it all was Charles, a man who had gone from being an unwanted stranger to possibly the only ally she could trust. As the sun began to set over the chaotic garden, one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same for the Mason family. The chaos that followed Charles's revelation was deafening. The guests, stunned, murmured among themselves, while Vivian struggled to maintain her composure. Edward Mason, pale as a ghost, approached his wife, staggering. "Vivian," he said in a trembling voice, "what is this man talking about?" Vivian, with a forced smile, tried to take control of the situation. "Darling, this is obviously a misunderstanding. This homeless man is clearly disturbed. Guards, please escort him off the property." But before the guards could move, Lucy intervened. "No!" she shouted, surprising herself with the strength of her voice. "I want to hear what Charles has to say." A sepulchral silence fell over the garden. All eyes were fixed on Charles, who, still holding the envelope with the evidence, began to speak. "5 years ago, I worked as a personal assistant to Richard Valenti, Vivian's first husband," Charles began, his voice clear and firm. "At first, everything seemed normal. Vivian was charming, attentive, but little by little, I began to notice strange things." Vivian tried to interrupt, but Edward stopped her with a gesture. "Continue," he said, his voice laden with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Charles nodded. "Richard started behaving erratically. He forgot things, made strange decisions in business. At the time, we thought it was stress, maybe even the beginnings of some degenerative disease. But the truth was much more sinister." He pulled some documents from the envelope. "I have here toxicology analyses that show that Richard was being slowly poisoned. Small doses of a substance that affected his cognitive ability, making him appear incompetent." A collective gasp ran through the audience. Lucy, feeling short of breath, instinctively clung to Charles's arm. "As Richard deteriorated," Charles continued, "Vivian was gaining more and more control over his finances and businesses. When he finally died, supposedly of a heart attack, she inherited everything. Vivian, seeing that the situation was slipping out of her hands, changed tactics. With tears in her eyes, she turned to Edward. "My love, you can't believe these lies. I love you. Everything I've done has been for us, for our family." Edward, visibly shocked, looked at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. For our family? Forcing my daughter to marry a stranger is for our family? It was for her own good, Vivian exclaimed, her facade beginning to crack. Lucy needed to settle down, to leave those silly dreams of being an artist. I just wanted the best for her. Lucy, feeling a wave of anger, stepped forward. The best for me or the best for you? I always wondered why you hated my dreams of being an artist so much. Now I understand. You feared I would leave, that you couldn't control me like you've been doing with my father. Vivian, cornered, finally showed her true face. Her expression hardened, and a cold smile formed on her lips. Oh, Lucy, always so naive. Do you think your father would have achieved anything without me? I was the one who made him the man he is today. Without me, he would still be a nobody. Edward, hurt and furious, confronted Vivian. A nobody? Is that what you think of me? Of our life together? Our life together has been a farce, Vivian spat, just like my marriage to Richard was. Men like you are weak, easy to manipulate. I just took what I deserved. The garden sank into stunned silence. No one could believe what they were witnessing. Vivian, realizing she had revealed too much, tried to retract, but it was too late. At that moment, two men made their way through the crowd. Vivian Mason, one of them said, showing a badge. I'm Detective Johnson. You're under arrest for the murder of Richard Valenti and attempted fraud against Edward Mason. As the police handcuffed a screaming and struggling Vivian, Lucy turned to Charles, her eyes full of questions. How did you know? Why did you wait until now to reveal it? Charles sighed, the weight of years of secrets finally lifting from his shoulders. After Richard's death, I tried to present evidence, but Vivian was too powerful. No one believed me. I lost my job, my reputation. I ended up on the streets, but I never stopped looking for a way to expose her. When I found out about her plan to marry you to me, he continued, looking at Lucy with a mixture of guilt and determination, I saw an opportunity. I knew it was risky, that it could hurt you in the process, and I'm sorry for that. But it was the only way to get close enough to unmask Vivian. Lucy, overwhelmed by emotions, didn't know what to say. On one hand, she felt betrayed, used as a pawn in this game of deception. On the other, she couldn't deny the gratitude she felt towards Charles for having exposed the truth. Edward, meanwhile, had collapsed into a chair, his world completely shattered. Lucy approached him, hugging him tightly. Dad, she whispered, I'm so sorry. But now we know the truth. We can start over. Edward nodded weakly, clinging to his daughter as if she were a lifeline in the midst of a storm. As the guests began to disperse and the police took Vivian away, this time with no possibility of escape, Charles approached father and daughter. Mr. Mason, Lucy, he said softly, I know this is a lot to process. If you need anything, I'll be here to help in any way I can. Lucy looked at him, a mix of conflicting emotions on her face. Charles, thank you for exposing the truth. But what happens now? With us, with this marriage? Charles shook his head. The marriage wasn't completed. Legally, we're not married. You're free, Lucy, free to pursue your dreams, to be the artist you've always wanted to be. A glimmer of hope shone in Lucy's eyes. Her dreams, which seemed so distant just hours ago, were now within reach again. But along with that hope, there was a new sensation, an unexpected connection with the man who had risked everything to save her family. As the sun set over the garden, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, Lucy, Edward, and Charles stood there, united by the extraordinary events of that day. The future was uncertain, full of challenges and possibilities, but for the first time in a long time, there was a sense that together they could face whatever came. What none of them knew was that this was just the beginning. The secrets revealed that day would trigger a series of events that would test their relationships, their strength, and their ability to forgive and love again. The road to redemption and happiness would be long and difficult, but at that moment, as they faced an uncertain future, there was a spark of hope that shone brighter than ever. The days following the failed wedding and Vivian's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions and chaos for the Mason family. The mansion, once a symbol of opulence and power, now seemed like a mausoleum of broken dreams and bitter truths. Lucy, still wearing her now wrinkled wedding dress, found herself in the library of the house, looking out the window towards the gardens where, just days ago, her life had taken a dramatic turn. The silence of the room was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. "Come in," she said, without taking her eyes off the landscape. Edward entered, his face marked by fatigue and worry. "Daughter," he began, his voice hoarse from lack of use, "we need to talk." Lucy turned to her father, noticing how aged he looked. The strong and confident man she remembered had been replaced by someone fragile and lost. "Dad," she said softly, approaching him, "how are you?" Edward tried to smile, but the gesture didn't reach his eyes. "I've been better," he admitted, collapsing into a nearby armchair. "The lawyers have been here all morning. It seems that that she..." His voice broke. Lucy knelt beside her father, taking his hands in hers. "What's wrong, Dad? What did the lawyers say?" Edward took a deep breath before continuing. "Vivian wasn't just planning to do to me what she did to her first husband. She had already started transferring large sums of money to overseas accounts. Our companies, they're on the brink of bankruptcy." Lucy felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "But how is that possible? I thought we were rich, powerful." Edward let out a bitter laugh. "I thought so too, but it seems it was all a house of cards, Lucy, and now it's crumbling." At that moment, a knock on the door interrupted their conversation. It was Charles, who entered with a determined expression on his face. "Excuse the interruption," he said, looking at father and daughter with sympathy, "but I think I have information that could help." Lucy and Edward looked at him expectantly as Charles approached, holding a folder. "I've been reviewing the documents I gathered about Vivian," he explained, "and I think I've found a way to trace the money she stole and transferred. If we act quickly, we could recover a large part of the funds." Edward sat up, a spark of hope lighting up his eyes for the first time in days. "Are you sure?" Charles nodded. "It won't be easy, and we'll need the help of the authorities, but I think it's possible." Lucy looked at Charles with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Why are you helping us? After everything that's happened, no one would blame you if you simply walked away from all this." Charles looked her directly in the eyes, his expression soft but determined. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because I care about you. Both of you." A silence charged with emotions filled the room. Lucy felt a flutter in her stomach at the intensity of Charles's gaze, but quickly pushed those thoughts aside. Now was not the time for sentimental confusion. "Well," said Edward, standing up with renewed energy, "where do we start?" The following days were a frenzy of activity. Charles worked tirelessly with lawyers and authorities, following the trail of money stolen by Vivian. Lucy, for her part, immersed herself in the accounting books of the family businesses, determined to understand and help in any way she could. One afternoon, as Lucy was reviewing some documents in the study, she heard a commotion in the foyer. When she went out to investigate, she was paralyzed to see who was standing at the entrance. "Alex," she whispered, feeling as if the air had been expelled from her lungs. There he was, her ex-boyfriend, the man she had planned to escape with before the wedding. Lucy hadn't seen him since Vivian had threatened him, forcing him to disappear. "Lucy," said Alex, his voice laden with emotion, I heard what happened. I came as soon as I could." Before Lucy could respond, Charles appeared behind her. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone cautious as he assessed the newcomer. Lucy, feeling the tension in the air, found herself trapped between the two men. "Charles, this is Alex, my ex-boyfriend." Alex stepped forward, extending his hand to Charles. "You must be the man who exposed Vivian. Thank you for protecting Lucy and her father." Charles shook Alex's hand, but Lucy noticed the stiffness in his posture. "I just did what needed to be done," Charles responded, his voice neutral. The atmosphere became charged with a palpable tension. Lucy, feeling overwhelmed by the situation, decided to take control. "Alex, I appreciate you coming, but now is not a good time. We're in the middle of a crisis and—" "I know," Alex interrupted, his eyes full of determination. "And I want to help. I have contacts in the art world who might be interested in investing in your father's companies. It could be the solution you need." Lucy looked at Alex, then at Charles, feeling the weight of the decisions she would have to make. On one hand, there was Alex, her first love, the man with whom she had dreamed of a future. On the other, there was Charles, who had risked everything to save her and her father, and who in a short time had become someone she could fully trust. I need time to think, Lucy finally said. Alex, I appreciate your offer. Please leave the details with our lawyer. Charles, can we review those documents you mentioned earlier? As Lucy walked away with Charles, she felt Alex's gaze fixed on her back. She knew that eventually she would have to face her feelings and make difficult decisions, but for now her priority was to save her family's legacy. That night, as Lucy prepared for bed, she couldn't help but think about how much her life had changed in such a short time. A few weeks ago, her biggest concern was escaping an arranged marriage. Now, she faced the possible ruin of her family, confused feelings towards two very different men, and an uncertain future. Looking out the window of her room, towards the city that stretched beyond the walls of the mansion, Lucy made a silent promise. No matter what fate had in store for her, she would fight. For her father, for her future, and for the truth that had cost so much to discover. What Lucy didn't know was that, while she contemplated her future, dark forces were moving in the shadows. Vivian, from her cell, was beginning to weave a web of revenge that would soon threaten to destroy everything Lucy and the others were fighting to rebuild. The game was far from over, and the coming days would bring challenges that would test the love, loyalty, and strength of all involved. The Mason Mansion, once a symbol of wealth and power, now buzzed with frantic activity. In the main office, converted into an improvised operations center, Lucy, Charles, and a team of lawyers and accountants worked tirelessly to unravel the financial web woven by Vivian. Lucy, with dark circles under her eyes from sleepless nights, was reviewing a stack of documents when she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. Looking up, she met Charles's concerned gaze. "You should rest a bit," he said, his voice tinged with genuine concern. "You've been working non-stop for days." Lucy tried to smile, but the gesture didn't reach her eyes. "I can't afford that luxury, Charles. Every minute counts if we want to save my father's companies." Charles nodded, understanding Lucy's determination. "I know, but you won't be able to help anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. Besides," he paused, as if hesitating to continue. "Besides what?" Lucy asked, intrigued by his sudden hesitation. "Alex has been calling," Charles responded, his tone carefully neutral. "He says he has important news about potential investors." Lucy felt a pang of guilt. Amidst the chaos of the past few days, she had barely thought about Alex or the offer he had made to help. "Thank you, Charles," she said, standing up. "I think you're right. I need a break, and maybe it's a good time to talk to Alex." As Lucy left the office, she didn't notice the shadow of concern that crossed Charles's face. In the mansion's garden, Lucy found Alex waiting for her. The afternoon sun bathed the place in a golden light, reminding her of the happy days they had shared there, in what seemed like another life. "Lucy," said Alex, approaching with a warm smile. "I'm glad you could make time to see me." "Alex," she responded, feeling a mix of nostalgia and anxiety. "Charles told me you had news." Alex's smile faltered slightly at the mention of Charles, but he quickly recovered. "Yes, I've been in touch with several art collectors and business people in the sector. They're interested in investing in your father's companies, especially if we reorient them towards the world of art and culture." Lucy felt a spark of hope. That's wonderful, Alex. It could be exactly what we need to get out of this crisis." "It is," Alex nodded, taking Lucy's hands in his. "But there's something else, Lucy. This isn't just about business. I've been thinking a lot about us, about what we had, about what we could have." Lucy felt her heart racing. "Alex, No, please let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I know things have changed, that you've been through a lot. But my feelings for you haven't changed. I love you, Lucy, and I'm willing to fight for our future together." Before Lucy could respond, a noise startled them. Charles was standing a few meters away, with an indecipherable expression on his face. "I'm sorry," Charles said, his voice tense. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to inform you, Lucy, that we've found a lead on one of Vivian's offshore accounts." We need your signature to proceed with the investigation. Lucy, feeling trapped between two worlds, nodded mechanically. Of course. I'll be right there. Turning to Alex, she added, Thank you for the news. We'll talk later, okay? As Lucy followed Charles back to the house, she felt the weight of both men's gazes on her. Her heart, divided between the past and a possible future, beat strongly in her chest. Inside the mansion, Edward Mason observed the scene from a second-floor window. His face, marked by worry and fatigue, softened as he saw his daughter. My little Lucy, he murmured to himself, if only I could protect you from all this. At that moment, his butler, Sebastian, entered the room. Sir, you have a call. It's from the prison. Edward felt a chill run down his spine. It could only be one person. Thank you, Sebastian. I'll take it here. With trembling hands, Edward picked up the receiver. Hello? Hello, dear. Vivian's cold and calculating voice resonated on the other end of the line. Have you missed me? Vivian, Edward responded, his voice laden with bitterness. What do you want? Oh, Edward, Vivian laughed softly. Is that any way to talk to your wife? I just wanted to warn you. You think you've seen it all, that you know all my secrets, but you have no idea. The game has only just begun. Before Edward could respond, the line went dead. He stood there, holding the phone, feeling a new fear take hold of him. Meanwhile, in the office, Lucy worked with Charles, reviewing the new documents. The tension between them was palpable, charged with unspoken words and confused feelings. Charles, Lucy began, breaking the silence. About what you saw in the garden. You don't have to explain anything to me, Charles interrupted, his voice soft but distant. Your feelings for Alex are your business. Lucy felt a pang of pain at his tone. It's not that simple. I'm confused. Everything has changed so much in such a short time. Charles looked at her, his eyes full of an emotion Lucy couldn't decipher. I understand, and I want you to know that whatever happens, I'll be here to help you, to help all of you. Lucy nodded, grateful for his words, but feeling that something important remained unsaid between them. As night fell over the Mason mansion, each of its inhabitants faced their own demons. Lucy, divided between two men and the responsibility of saving her family's legacy. Edward, tormented by Vivian's veiled threats and the weight of his own mistakes. Charles, fighting against his growing feelings for Lucy, while trying to maintain his focus on the mission that had brought him there. And somewhere in the city, hidden in the shadows, a new player was preparing to enter the scene. Someone from Vivian's past, someone with their own secrets and agenda, someone who would soon shake the already unstable foundations of the Masons' lives. The night advanced, and with it the certainty that the coming days would bring new challenges, shocking revelations, and decisions that would change the course of their lives forever. The board was set, the pieces in motion, and the real game was only just beginning. The dim light of dawn began to filter through the windows of the Mason mansion when a black car pulled up in front of the main entrance. From the vehicle descended an elegant woman in her 50s, with a bearing that exuded confidence and mystery. Her name was Eleanor Vega, and her arrival was about to shake the already unstable foundations of the Mason family. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, Lucy was waking up after a restless night full of confusing dreams. She dressed quickly and went down to the dining room where she found her father, Edward, looking out the window with a worried expression. "Good morning, Dad," Lucy greeted, noticing the dark circles under her father's eyes. "Did you get any sleep?" Edward turned to his daughter, managing a tired smile. "Good morning, sweetheart. Not much, to be honest. There's something I need to tell you." Before he could continue, Sebastian, the butler, rushed into the room. "Excuse the interruption, but there's a visitor. A woman who says her name is Elena Vega. She insists it's urgent to speak with you." Lucy looked at her father, noticing how he paled at hearing the name. "Dad? Who is Elena Vega?" Edward took a deep breath before responding. "Someone from the past, Lucy. Someone I thought I'd never see again." At that moment, Elena Vega entered the dining room, her presence immediately filling the room. Well, Edward, The years haven't been as kind to you as I'd hoped." Lucy observed the exchange, feeling she was witnessing something deeper than she could comprehend. "Excuse me, but can someone explain to me what's going on here?" Eleanor turned her penetrating gaze towards Lucy. "You must be Lucy. The last time I saw you, you were barely a child. Allow me to introduce myself properly. I'm Elena Vega, your father's former business partner, and, well, let's say I have a complicated history with your family." Edward intervened, his voice tense. "Elena, what are you doing here after all these years?" "Oh, Edward," Elena replied with an enigmatic smile, "I'm here to save your empire, of course, and perhaps in the process settle some old scores." Before the conversation could continue, Charles rushed into the room, an expression of urgency on his face. He stopped short upon seeing Eleanor, a spark of recognition in his eyes. "Miss Vega," Charles said, his voice mixed with surprise and caution. "I didn't expect to see you here." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Well, young Charles Mendoza. It seems fate has decided to reunite all the players in this little drama." Lucy, feeling increasingly confused and frustrated, raised her voice. "Can someone please explain what's going on here? How is it that everyone seems to know each other?" Edward sighed, resigned. "I think it's time you knew the whole truth, Lucy. Eleanor, Charles, please, take a seat. This is a story that everyone needs to hear." As the group settled in the main living room, the tension in the air was palpable. Edward began to speak, his voice laden with regret and nostalgia. 20 years ago, Elena, Vivian, and I were partners in a promising business. We were about to close a deal that would make us immensely rich, but things got complicated." Elena interrupted, her voice sharp. "What Edward means is that he and Vivian betrayed me. They left me out of the deal and took everything for themselves." Lucy looked at her father, horrified. "Dad, is that true?" Edward lowered his head, ashamed. "Yes, it's true. It was the biggest mistake of my life, one I've regretted ever since." Charles, who had been listening attentively, intervened. "But that doesn't explain how Vivian ended up manipulating and poisoning her first husband." Elena let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, that's the best part. Vivian didn't just betray me, she also betrayed Edward. She used the contacts and money they gained in that deal to marry Richard Valenti and start her manipulation game." Lucy felt her head spinning with all this new information. "But why have you come back now, Elena? And how does Charles fit into all of this?" Elena looked at Charles with a knowing smile. "Charles here worked for me before becoming Richard Valenti's assistant. He was my informant inside Vivian's organization for years." Charles nodded, confirming Elena's statement. "It's true, Elena hired me to keep an eye on Vivian and gather evidence of her crimes. But when things got out of control with Richard, I had to act on my own." Lucy felt betrayed once again. "Why didn't you tell me, Charles? Was it all a lie?" Charles approached Lucy, his eyes pleading. "No, Lucy. My feelings for you are real. Everything I've done has been to protect you and your father." Edward, visibly exhausted by the revelations, addressed Elena. "What do you want, Elena? Revenge?" Elena smiled, but this time her smile had a touch of sadness. "What I want, Edward, is justice, and the opportunity to rebuild what I once lost. I have the resources and contacts to save your companies, but in exchange, I want to be the majority shareholder." Silence fell over the room as everyone processed Elena's proposal. Lucy, feeling overwhelmed by the revelations and conflicting emotions, stood up abruptly. "I need some air," she said, heading towards the door. Charles made a move to follow her, but Lucy stopped him with a look. "No, Charles, please, I need to be alone." As Lucy went out to the garden, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Her father, whom she had always seen as an honorable man, had been complicit in betrayal and deception. Charles, whom she had begun to trust, and for whom she was developing feelings, turned out to be part of a much larger plan. And in the midst of all this was Alex, waiting for an answer, offering a future that now seemed to belong to another life. In the living room, Edward, Eleanor, and Charles continued their discussion, negotiating the terms of a possible agreement that could save the Mason Empire, but at an incalculable emotional cost. Meanwhile, in prison, Vivian was receiving a visit from her lawyer. Her malicious smile suggested she had an ace up her sleeve, a secret she had yet to reveal that threatened to change the game once again. As the sun rose in the sky, bathing the Mason mansion with its light, the fates of all involved hung by a thread. The decisions they would make in the coming hours would not only determine the future of the family business, but also the course of their lives and relationships. Lucy, standing in the garden where days before she had talked with Alex, found herself at a crossroads. Trust her father and Charles despite their lies, accept Elena's offer and save the family legacy, or maybe it was time to leave it all behind and seek her own path. What no one knew was that another figure from the past was quietly approaching the mansion, someone whose appearance was about to add another layer of complexity to the already complicated situation. The board was set, the pieces in motion, and the next move could change everything. The afternoon sun began to descend over the Mason mansion, casting long shadows that seemed to symbolize the secrets and lies that had come to light. In the garden, Lucy remained motionless, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and thoughts. It was the sound of approaching footsteps that finally snapped her out of her reverie. As she turned, she found herself face to face with Alex, whose expression of concern deepened upon seeing the pain in Lucy's eyes. "Lucy," he said softly, "what's happened? I've been calling and—" Before he could finish, Lucy threw herself into his arms, the tears she had been holding back finally overflowing. Alex held her tightly, offering silent comfort as she sobbed against his chest. After a few moments, Lucy pulled away slightly, wiping away her tears. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "It's just that everything has fallen apart, Alex. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about Charles, it was all a lie." Alex looked at her with a mixture of confusion and determination. "Tell me," he said, guiding her to a nearby bench. As Lucy recounted the events of the morning, the revelations about her father, Vivian, and Elena Vega's appearance, Alex listened attentively, his face passing through a range of emotions. "Lucy," he said finally when she finished her story, "I know this is overwhelming, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what happens." Lucy looked at him, a small smile forming on her lips. "Thank you, Alex. You don't know how much that means to me." Meanwhile, inside the mansion, the tension was palpable. Edward, Elena, and Charles continued their discussion, voices occasionally rising loud enough for the servants to exchange worried glances. "You can't expect me to just hand over control of everything, Elena," Edward argued, his voice tired but firm. Elena, however, didn't yield. "And what alternative do you have, Edward? Without my help, you'll lose everything. At least this way, you'll keep a part of the business and, more importantly, you can protect Lucy." Charles, who had been observing the exchange in silence, finally intervened. "Maybe there's a way to reach an agreement that benefits everyone. If we could—" His words were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Moments later, Sebastian, the butler, entered the room, his normally imperturbable face showing signs of surprise. "Excuse the interruption," he said, "but there's someone who insists on seeing Mr. Mason. He says it's urgent." Edward frowned. "Who is it, Sebastian?" Before the butler could answer, a figure appeared in the doorway of the living room. It was a man in his 60s with a distinguished bearing and penetrating gaze. "Hello, Edward," the newcomer said, his deep voice filling the room. "It's been a long time." Edward turned pale as if he had seen a ghost. "Richard," he whispered, "but how is this possible? We thought you were—" "Dead," completed Richard Valenti, Vivian's supposed deceased first husband. That's exactly what Vivian wanted everyone to believe. The silence that followed this statement was deafening. Elena was the first to recover from the surprise. "Well, this certainly makes things more interesting," she commented, an enigmatic smile playing on her lips. Charles, for his part, seemed to be in a state of shock. "Mr. Valenti," he finally said, we thought Vivian had—" Richard raised a hand, stopping Charles's words. "I know, boy, and in a way she did. But that's a story for another time. Now I believe we have more urgent matters to attend to." At that moment, Lucy and Alex entered the room, stopping abruptly upon feeling the tension in the air. "Dad?" Lucy asked, her gaze passing from her father to the stranger. "What's going on?" Edward, still visibly shocked, made the introductions. Lucy, this is Richard Valenti, Vivian's first husband. Lucy's eyes widened. But how? Richard turned to Lucy, his expression softening. It's a long story, dear. One that involves betrayal, deception, and a revenge plan that has taken years to develop. Alex, feeling the need to protect Lucy, stepped forward. Excuse me, Mr. Valenti, but what does all this mean for the Mason family? For Lucy? Richard looked at Alex with interest. Ah, another player in this drama, and you are? Alex Herrera, he replied, holding the older man's gaze. Close friend of the family. I see, Richard murmured before turning to the group. What it means, young Alex, is that the cards are about to be reshuffled. Vivian thought she had eliminated me from the game, but she only gave me time to plan my comeback. Elena, who had been observing the exchange with interest, intervened. Richard, darling, you always had a knack for dramatic entrances, but what exactly are you proposing? Richard smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I propose an alliance, Elena, between you, me, and the Masons. Together we can not only save Edward's empire, but also destroy Vivian once and for all. The room sank into a tense silence as everyone processed Richard's proposal. Lucy, feeling overwhelmed once again, sought Alex's hand, finding comfort in his constant presence. Edward, after a moment of reflection, spoke. Before making any decision, I think we all deserve to hear the full story. Richard, Eleanor, Charles, it's time for all the cards to be on the table. As the group prepared for what promised to be a night of shocking revelations, in the state prison, Vivian received news that left her pale and trembling. Her lawyer, with a shaky voice, informed her, Mrs. Mason, there's been an unexpected development. Richard Valenti is alive. Vivian, for the first time in a long time, felt control slipping from her grasp. Her mind worked frantically, trying to find a way out, a way to keep her web of lies intact. Back at the Mason mansion, as Richard began his account, no one noticed the shadowy figure observing from outside, hidden among the garden bushes. A figure who had their own plans, and who would soon add another layer of complexity to the already tangled plot. The night promised to be long, full of painful truths and decisions that would change the course of their lives forever. And as the moon rose in the sky, illuminating the mansion with its silver light, the fates of all involved hung by a thread, waiting to be woven into a new pattern, for better or for worse. The night had been long and emotionally charged at the Mason mansion. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows of the main living room, they illuminated the tired but determined faces of those present. Richard Valenti had finished telling his story, a narrative of deception, survival, and a meticulously crafted revenge plan. Lucy, seated between Alex and Charles, tried to assimilate everything she had heard. Her father, Edward, seemed to have aged years in a single night, the weight of his past mistakes visible in every line of his face. So, Lucy said, breaking the silence that had fallen over the room, all this time, while we believed you were dead, you were planning your return. Richard nodded, his eyes showing a mixture of determination and regret. That's right, Lucy. When I discovered Vivian's plan to poison me, I knew that the only way to survive and eventually expose her was to disappear. Faking my death gave me the time and freedom to gather the necessary evidence. Eleanor, who had been listening attentively, leaned forward. And now that you're back, what exactly is your plan, Richard? My plan, Richard replied, is to use the evidence I've gathered to not only imprison Vivian for her crimes, but also to recover everything she stole from me, and in the process, help the Mason family recover what's theirs. Edward, who had remained silent for much of the conversation, finally spoke. Richard, Eleanor, I know I've failed you in the past. My actions, my complicity with Vivian, have caused incalculable damage. I don't deserve your help, but for the sake of my daughter, I ask that you give us this opportunity. Lucy looked at her father, moved by the vulnerability in his voice. For the first time, she saw not the powerful businessman, but a man broken by his mistakes, seeking redemption. Charles, who had been processing all the information in silence, stood up. Mr. Valenti, there's something I must confess. Richard raised a hand, interrupting him. It's not necessary, Charles. I know you were hired by Elena to keep an eye on Vivian, and I know that your actions, although not always transparent, were motivated by a genuine desire to do the right thing. Lucy looked at Charles, her emotions conflicted. On one hand, the wound of his deception was still fresh. On the other, she couldn't deny the sincerity in his eyes, the evident remorse for having hurt her. Alex, who had remained as a silent pillar of support for Lucy, finally spoke. "All this is fascinating, but what does it mean for the future? For Mason Enterprises? For Lucy?" Eleanor smiled, a smile that for the first time seemed genuinely friendly. "That, dear Alex, is the million-dollar question, and I believe I have a proposal that could benefit us all." As Eleanor outlined her plan, which involved a merger of Richard's assets, Eleanor's contacts in the art world, and what was left of the Mason Empire, Lucy felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. Maybe, from the ashes of so much deception and betrayal, something good could emerge. As the morning progressed, the details of the plan were solidified. Richard would use his evidence to ensure that Vivian faced justice for all her crimes. Eleanor would contribute her expertise in the business and art world to restructure and diversify the companies. Edward, although ceding majority control, would maintain a role on the board of directors, working to redeem his past mistakes. And Lucy. Lucy found herself at the center of it all, designated as the young and fresh face of the new company, tasked with leading a foundation that would use part of the profits to help homeless people and support emerging artists. As the group discussed the final details, a commotion outside the mansion caught their attention. Sebastian entered the room hurriedly. "Sir," he said, addressing Edward, "the police are here, and Mrs. Vivian is with them." The group rushed to the main entrance. There, flanked by 2 officers, was Vivian. Her usual impeccable appearance was disheveled, but her eyes shone with barely contained fury. "Well, well," she said, her voice laden with venom. "What a touching family reunion. Richard, darling, what a surprise to see you alive." Richard stepped forward, his presence imposing. "It's over, Vivian. Your crimes, your manipulations. Everything comes to light today." Vivian let out a bitter laugh. "You think this is the end? It's barely the beginning. I have information that could sink everyone present. Edward, Eleanor, none of you have clean hands." It was then that Lucy, driven by a strength she didn't know she possessed, stepped forward. "Enough, Vivian. For years you've sown discord and pain. You've manipulated, you've lied, you've destroyed lives, but this ends today." Turning to the others, she continued, "Yes, you've all made mistakes. You all have secrets and regrets, but today we have the opportunity to start anew, to build something better on the rubble of our mistakes." Her words seemed to have a profound effect on everyone present. Even Vivian, for a moment, seemed to lose her mask of arrogance. The officers, after a brief exchange with Richard and reviewing some of the evidence he had in his possession, proceeded to take Vivian away, this time with no possibility of escape. As the police car drove away, Lucy felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She turned to the group gathered at the entrance of the mansion. Her father, Richard, Elena, Charles, and Alex. Each of them had played a role in the drama that had been her life in recent months, and now somehow they all formed part of her future. "So," she said, a small smile forming on her lips, "where do we start?" The following months were a whirlwind of activity. The restructuring of the companies, now under the name New Dawn Foundation, proceeded steadily. Lucy, with the support of Alex and his experience in the art world, led initiatives to support emerging artists and create programs to help homeless people. Charles, after much reflection and honest conversations with Lucy, decided to step away for a while, feeling he needed to find his own path and redemption. But he promised to stay in touch and support the Foundation's efforts from wherever he was. Edward, working hand in hand with Richard and Eleanor, dedicated himself to dismantling the networks of corruption that Vivian had woven over the years, using his influence and knowledge to ensure that justice was done. A year after that fateful morning, Lucy found herself on the rooftop of the Mason Mansion, now converted into the main headquarters of the New Dawn Foundation. Beside her was Alex, his hand intertwined with hers. "What are you thinking about?" Alex asked, noticing Lucy's distant gaze. She smiled, gently squeezing his hand. "About how much everything has changed. about how, from so much pain and betrayal, we've managed to create something beautiful and meaningful. Alex nodded, understanding. It's been an incredible journey, and the best part is that we're just getting started. At that moment, the rooftop door opened. Edward, Richard, and Elena emerged, their faces showing a mixture of emotion and anticipation. "Lucy," Edward said, his voice filled with pride, "the first beneficiaries of our housing program have arrived. Do you want to come down and meet them?" Lucy felt her heart swell with emotion. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the tangible fruit of months of hard work and dedication. As the group headed towards the elevator, Lucy couldn't help but think about how far they had come. From a forced wedding and an empire built on lies, they had forged a future of hope and redemption. The elevator began its descent, taking them towards a new chapter in their lives. And as Lucy looked at the people surrounding her, her father seeking redemption, Richard and Elena, former rivals now allies, and Alex, her anchor in the storm, she knew that, whatever happened, they would face the future together. Outside, the sun shone brightly over the city, symbolizing the dawn of a new era for the Mason family and all those around them. An era of second chances, of rediscovered love, and of the possibility of changing lives for the better. And so, as the elevator doors opened to the lobby filled with hopeful faces, Lucy stepped forward, ready to write the next chapter of her story. A story of redemption, love, and the transformative power of truth and compassion.